the US history in one simple lecture, but to understand the way American people think, it's important to know some of their history, so you can put things in perspective. That is why today's lecture will be about the history and culture of America. The land on which today are Canada and the United States of America was discovered by Columbus. The first real settlers were the Pilgrims, who arrived in America in 1620. Of course, Native Americans, or Indians as you might know them, were already living on the land the Pilgrims and Puritans claimed. We will talk more about the Pilgrims in a later paragraph. The United States has always had a difficult history. Wars divided the country on different topics. Because it is such a big country, there were a lot of things to keep in mind. But let's start at the beginning. In the 18th century, the USA was owned by the United Kingdom. The then 13 states wanted to be their own country, so the War of Independence was fought. On the 4th of July 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, making clear that from that day onwards, the USA was its own country. To this day, every year, Independence Day is celebrated on the 4th of July. Big fireworks and bonfires are lit to celebrate the independence from the United Kingdom. In 1778, the first Constitution was drawn up, and so the United States of America came to exist. In the first Constitution were 10 golden rules, the 10 Amendments, giving people certain rights, like owning a gun and having the right to a speedy and just trial. The first President of the United States was George Washington. A big problem in the 19th century was slavery. By that time, the country had grown and consisted of more states than the 13 it started with, but still it wasn't the full 50 we know the USA to be today. The USA was divided into North and South. The North, also called the Union States, wanted to stop slavery, while the South, the Confederate States, they were very much for the use of slaves. They were cheap, and they mostly had a good life, according to many Southerners, and they really liked them working on their plantations. They really needed the cheap labor in order to make a lot of money in the South. Between 1861 and 1865, the Civil War was fought basically over slavery between the northern and the southern states. At the end of that war, the northern states had won and slavery was abolished by President Lincoln. However, this didn't mean that slaves were suddenly free to go wherever they wanted to go. Black people faced violence and racism, and many of them said they were actually worse off after slavery had been abolished. Remember, we're specifically talking about the South. Conditions in the South were much worse than in the North. So, black people had a lot of problems surviving in American culture and American society because they had been seen as inferior and almost like animals for so long. Not many whites wanted to know black people. Soon, the white people of the United States demanded restrictions for black people. These restrictions were called the Black Code. Black people were not allowed to vote. They had to go to black schools. They were not welcome in certain shops, and they had to drink from different water fountains than the whites. This whole process is called segregation, because you're separating the whites, in their opinion, superior people, from the black, inferior people, and it made life for blacks very difficult. Right after the Civil War, so after slavery was abolished, the Ku Klux Klan was founded, the KKK, which is an organization of white people wanting to get rid of black people, so as a reaction to abolishing slavery. They do still exist today, but it's getting harder and harder to find support for their cause. In the 1960s, a lot of movements happening. A very big movement of them was the African American movement, fighting for equal rights. And one important man within that movement is definitely Martin Luther King Jr. He takes a stand to fight injustice, and he tries to get the same rights for black people as white people have. Martin Luther King gives his famous speech in 1963, the I Have a Dream speech. He's killed in 1968. We'll dive deeper into his life in the next lectures, and you'll hear more. Black men got the right to vote in 1870, as you can see. Took another 100 years for them to be seen as equal before they felt their vote mattered. Getting the right to vote in 1870 didn't really mean anything in the South. Again, we're talking especially about the South. White people would make sure black people were not able to vote. They would stop them on the way to the voting booth, and if needed, with violence. Again, in the northern states, it was a little bit better. Native Americans, not just black people, were oppressed in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Native Americans were also treated badly by the newcomers. The new people wanted to Americanize the natives by telling them to act like Americans. Native Americans had their own customs and rules, but the new immigrants wanted to integrate the natives into new American culture. Everyone had to basically be the same type of American. When this didn't happen overnight, the Native Americans were forcefully put into reservations against their will, assigned portions of land that was given to the natives by the new immigrants. Well, actually, of course, the new immigrants had stolen the land of the Native Americans when they arrived in the USA. Being forced to live in small areas of land, many Native Americans died or eventually changed their ways to be more American. In the process, a lot of the Native American culture has been lost. This whole process of making them more American is called Americanization. So reservations and losing the Native American culture. In 1941, Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, is attacked by the Japanese, bringing the United States into the Second World War. The bombing of the US warship by Japan was cause enough for the United States to enter World War II and fight alongside the Allied forces to stop the Central Powers from winning. This was the first time the United States actually got involved with European affairs when it came to wars. Since then, they've been doing a lot of this. In the same year that Martin Luther King gave his famous speech, so 1963, something terrible happens. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is shot while touring the state of Texas. To give support and show his love for the country, he is shot twice, once through the head and the other in his back. He dies in Parkland Hospital several hours later. After intensive research, Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested for the murder. To this day, we don't know for certain if he did it or why. So, in a very short lecture, I've told you about the history of the United States of America.